Hi, I'm Toni Williams, and this is Brooklyn Savvy. Hi, I'm Toni Williams, and this is Brooklyn Savvy. We are going to be talking about something today that is very, very timely, and it's something that is close to my heart and my pocketbook. We're going to be talking about the wealth gap with SHAWN Rochester. He's written this book called The Black Tax. If you've watched Brooklyn Savvy before, you probably caught his show. There was so much interest in the topic that I decided we needed to do a repeat and then to talk more in depth about the Black tax, because you can't talk about the wealth gap with Black people or Black families having 1/10 the income or the wealth of white families unless you talk about the Black tax. So what I'm going to do is we're going to turn this program over to SHAWN Rochester. And we also have on Brooklyn Savvy, we have Colvin Granum. He is the president and CEO of the Bedford-Stuyvesant Restoration Corporation. And we have our savvy panelistas. We have PHYLLIS WHITE-THORNE and Dr. Maria D. Longoria. We're so happy to have Dr. Longoria. She is a history professor at Medgar College. So thank you so much for joining. So SHAWN, talk to us about the Black tax. What is the Black tax? Generally speaking, because when I speak to people about a Black tax, they're like, what is this?
Mm-hmm. So generally speaking, the Black tax is the financial cost of discrimination against Black people that's driven by conscious and unconscious bias from individuals, institutions, and organizations. So it is the financial impact of anti-Black discrimination.
Wow. So in speaking about this, though, where and how does it show up? Talk to us about how it shows up, say, in real estate. How does it show up?
So it starts off fairly innocuously. So on average, you'll be told about, 20% less homes. You'll be shown, 20% less homes, right? So it's going to take longer for you on average to find your dream home. When you start to inquire about financing, you tend to get, less of a response or more negative of a response. Researchers say if there's an indication that you're Black, you get treated as if your credit is 71 points lower than what it actually is, which is obviously a substantial portion. You are significantly more likely, 3 times more likely, to get a high interest rate loan based on research that they did in lending in the last market downturn. You're likely to get, as much as $3,000 more in closing costs associated with that. So those are just 3 things on just the acquiring right of the home. And then it gets even more challenging, because what you see is as the percentage of Black people within a community increases, the appreciation on the home is less robust than it would be, compared to like a white family. So if you think about those 3 things over like a 30-year mortgage, let's say, for example, you bought a house that was about, maybe $450,000. The 3 of those things that I talked about, the incremental interest, the incremental closing costs, and the reduction in equity appreciation could cost you an additional $345,000 over that 30-year period, right?
SHAWN, I know you're also familiar with sales of homes by African Americans, especially those living in sort of predominantly white neighborhoods, and the fact that if there's evidence that the home is owned by an African American, the offers to purchase are less. Or put it a different way, I just read one piece that said that when the Black family took all the evidence of their existence in the home or ownership in the home out of the home, the offers they got increased by 40%.
So the issue is here, how does this show up in an economic way, right? And the point that Colvin is making is the mere presence of Blackness triggers a market reaction, which is irrational when you think about it, right? So there's the reference to the interracial couple down south that had their home appraised. And there was well over $100,000 differential between when the appraiser thought it was a black-owned home versus a white-owned home, right? And the point here isn't the injustice or the immorality associated with it, is the fact that this has a economic impact, a cash flow effect, right? That has an intergenerational impact, because over the course of that 30 years, that's money that we don't now have to pass on to our children, right? And their children,
Right.
is what we spend a lifetime working to do. This is the manifestation of bias. And bias is a systematic error in judgment, but that error in judgment costs us money.
You know, and you talk about the deficit mindset, and that is created around Black people because of this unconscious bias.
Part of the challenge is people don't realize how high these biases are. Because they want to believe, and there's a lot of information that wants us all to believe that we're in a post-racial society, right? And therefore, people feel very comfortable telling us how we should interpret racialized, discriminatory, actions towards us, right? Surely you must be bringing race into something where race isn't the case. So if you look at what research says, they did a study on the amount of bias across the American electorate, right? And this places like, Chicago, Michigan, Stanford, Associated Press, et cetera, And what they found was explicit bias, like people know exactly what they're doing, was 51% of the electorate. The implicit, the unconscious, they don't know exactly what they're doing. They don't know what they're doing, but they're still having an impact. That was around 56%, right? So that's almost 6 in 10. These are extraordinarily high levels of anti-Black bias. See, what we're doing is talking about how this manifests itself, right, in markets that are really important to wealth accumulation for Black people. But the first thing that everybody needs to understand is that these levels are extraordinarily high to begin with. The normal state is anti-Black bias and automatic white preference.
Now, Maria, we've talked about whiteness before, but let's give our viewing audience just another round with this, meaning what whiteness means and how it is a social construct.
Okay, so one of the things that we've talked about in the past is that historically, right, there was really no concept of race, but this idea of people being Black and or white develops as a way to justify some of the systems that are put in place, and particularly slavery in this country, not just this country. Let's say in this whole side of the world, North America, South America, Central America. That's where you really see this idea develop, because white meant free and Black meant enslaved. And so as systems were put in place and as the country developed, particularly the United States, and I'm referencing that because that's where we are, right? Particularly in the United States, what you saw was everything that was done, every law that was created, every document that was developed, including the Constitution. If you look at the Declaration of Independence, all of those documents, they are all created in a way that pushes one group of people and empowers one group of people over another. I'll use the Constitution as an example. There is a clause in the Constitution when the Constitution was created that protected slavery. And so there's no way you can justify or say that the Constitution was created for everybody when in the document itself, it says we're not going to touch the slave trade for 20 years, right? And we can get into all the other things that come around that are developed as a result of that. But that's just one example how the racism that we're talking about here, this anti-bias, right? This anti-Blackness bias is so ingrained in everything in our society from its inception, from the creation of the United States.
Yes. And we're talking about homes, which of course are key to wealth and being able to pass it on. But we're also seeing this show up in the automotive market. Shawn, can you talk to us about what it's like buying a car while Black?
Yeah, so this is a particularly important market, right? Because we buy over 5 million cars a year, right? Between leasing new cars and used cars, so it is a massive market for the Black population. So there were some studies that were done in the greater Chicagoland area where they created a number of buyers that they would send out to various auto dealerships, and they wanted to examine the level of, bias that might show up in an automotive buying process. So some were Black, some were white. They were all trained with the same negotiating skill set, and they all had the same kind of buyer's profile in terms of credit history and all the characteristics associated with that. And what they found when they sent these folks out was that the opening offer to the buyers who were white was 43% lower than opening offers to the buyers who were Black, 40% lower. Now, after the Black buyers used their negotiating strategy, right, which they were taught, and it was the same strategy for Black and white. The offer that they settled on was still higher than the opening offer that the white buyers were given before any negotiation to begin with, right? So it was showing up as an average of $1,100 difference in purchase price. The other issue is that dealers often have the ability to mark up interest rates, right? So they get your credit profile, they send it off to the bureau to figure out what your number is. They reach out to a financing source and they will say, we can finance this person at X rate, 5%, let's just make it up. And the dealers have a certain amount that they can add on top of that from a profit margin standpoint. That's fine, right? But what you wind up seeing is that Black buyers on average are seeing over 100 to 450% higher markups on that. So they're marking up the interest rates higher for the Black buyers. Now, here's the other thing that's very challenging about that. If you in a situation where you need a car, you're probably going to have 7 to 9 over the course of your career. So when you start adding up the incremental difference in purchase price, if you're so unfortunate to be in that situation, and the incremental cost around interest rate, right? And we haven't gotten to not the financing, but the insurance that's associated with it, right? Because you pay higher insurance rates if you're in Black communities, right? When you start looking over a lifetime, that could be an incremental $70,000 of incremental expense, right? For that Black person or that family. Again, that's money that we cannot pass on now to our children, right? That's a cash flow effect. It's not that it happens, it's that it has a financial intergenerational wealth impact.
Absolutely. Now, you said something about having to pay more auto insurance. My question becomes, why is that? Some would say, oh, that's because you're in a high crime area. Is that a legitimate point of view or perspective?
The data, as I have read it, and as they say, they're trying to do comparable neighborhoods, right? So it's, middle class white neighborhood versus middle class Black neighborhood, right? The difference between the insurance premium is 194%. That's substantial, right?
Substantial.
So the issue is, the problem with biases is that there's a level of irrationality associated with it. So surveys have been done where they ask like white home buyers, if we just switch back to that real quick, and they said, listen, if you could find the home that has the characteristics you're looking for in terms of safety, school system, amenities, the number of rooms, all those kinds of things that we care deeply about, right? But it's in a Black community. Do you want it? And they don't want it, right? That's how powerful the association with crime and violence and lower values and so on and so forth, that's kind of ingrained into the conscious and subconscious
into their psyche.
So many people. Yeah.
Phyllis, you had something, and then I'll jump over to Maria.
Sure. Especially, I have an example of what Shawn is talking about right now. I was speaking to a woman some months ago, actually, maybe a couple of years back, and it was a white woman, and we were just chatting, and she told me that she had just secured a beautiful apartment in Harlem. And I mentioned, oh, wow, I said the costs of apartments in Harlem have just skyrocketed and are through the ceiling. She said, oh no, I got a really good deal. And she mentioned an amount that was under $1 million, when I know that even the shells of the brownstones in Harlem were at least $1 million. She was saying it was very, very reasonable, and she had purchased it. And I think about that, and I realize that in trying to regentrify neighborhoods where there's perceived value, and we know that Harlem being very close to Manhattan, I mean, very close to downtown, has been a choice area. White people will be offered a really good deal in terms of the cost of the building, and probably even in terms of interest rates, in order to, as an incentive for them to move into these neighborhoods. In the same time, I went into Harlem and I saw this huge truck, and it was encouraging people that lived in Harlem to move to the Poconos. And I couldn't help but think that there was definitely something going on there, where we were trying now giving white people an incentive to move into an area, and Black people an incentive to move out of that area. So, I mean, I'm sure that it wasn't coincidental, and I'm sure it speaks to what you're talking about, Shawn.
Maria, you wanted to share something.
How does this whole renaming of these areas, right, kind of play along with this? Because if you see in Harlem, you have sections of Harlem that they have now renamed, right? So, or at least there's an attempt to rename things that have been identified as Black. They want to rename Marcus Garvey Park, right? There is, what is it? Central Park North. There is, you know, all these areas that are Harlem and have been Harlem. And you see this trying to get folks in there, and you see it in Bed-Stuy too, and the changing of the attempts to change the culture, the elimination of house music in Fort Greene Park, right? Because the neighbors are complaining, things like that. Can you speak a little bit to that?
Yeah, a lot. So the changing of names and the like is an expression of anti-Blackness, right? You don't want the association. What is driving the gentrification is the massive gap in capital, right? On a group basis, on a per capita basis between Black and white communities. The second thing that's also driving it is the fact that Black communities are undervalued. They're actually below market rate because Black people are there, right? You have less appreciation than they should otherwise have. So typically when you have gentrification, it's because you have white interest in particular areas for whatever reasons, right? It's close to a metro area or transportation, so on and so forth. And what their interest and desire is just remarking it to market, right? Black property and real estate holding on average is about $300 billion below where it should be, you know, across the general kind of population. That's because part of it is because it's not desired by white people. White people control 90% of all wealth in the country. When a market that size has limited interest in your assets, the price of your assets is going to fall. When they start to have interest in it, it's going to remark to what market is. The other thing that happens is that investments follow kind of, you know, the flow of white settlement, right? So you have more infrastructure investment that goes along with that, right? And also the following and arrival of businesses to make those communities into enclaves as well. Go ahead, Colvin.
Yeah, Colvin, yes, please. And I have a question for you as well, Colvin, but you have a point you want to make.
On this gentrification point, about maybe a dozen years ago, I was on a panel with an economist who was not Black, and he referenced gentrification as the largest transfer of wealth by white people to Black people. The thing that angered me was we were not being given credit like any other homeowner for making a smart investment or holding on to our investment because we realized that there was some benefit to it. We were the beneficiaries of white largesse. But I think what it reflects is just a larger attitude about who we are, our ability, and where we stand vis-a-vis, you know, white wealth, right?
That is an excellent, excellent point. I want to talk too, and this goes to directly to you, Colvin, about what we're seeing now during COVID in terms of the failure of Black businesses. Can you speak to that? What you're seeing in Central Brooklyn?
Well, I think what we're seeing in Central Brooklyn is representative of what's being seen across the nation. I just looked at something that said that the Federal Reserve said that between February and April of 2020, 41% of Black-owned businesses closed compared to 17% of white-owned businesses. And we know why that is, right? The reason is, as Shawn has pointed out, is that our businesses are thinly capitalized. And as a result, they have very little resilience when new income is not coming in or when expenses spike. So yes, it's been very devastating. And on top of that, what we know is that these businesses, African-American owned businesses, receive the federal Paycheck Protection Program loans at a far lower rate than white-owned businesses, in part because they didn't have the established banking relationships early on with commercial businesses, commercial banks. And a lot of and most of those banks also only accepted online applications from those who had established accounts. I think things have changed recently, where there are more vehicles, for example, Carver Bank and other African-American owned banks and community development financial institutions that are operated by African-Americans or Latinx people. Those are being far more aggressive and effective at getting loans to African-American and minority-owned businesses.
And what that would say is that maybe Blacks need to bank Black, Shawn? Is that what it says? That we need to be banking Black, Shawn?
Absolutely. So, Black people, we have over $130 billion, right, in checking, savings, CDs, in non-Black financial institutions. Black banks themselves have about 4.5 or $4.7 billion, and there's probably 18 of them left. The amount of money, $4 out of every $10,000 in the U.S. banking system is in a Black bank. So there's just not enough deposits in Black banks to be able to provide the loans to businesses and or to consumers that need it. So you do need a massive shift of deposits into Black financial institutions, clearly by Black people, but also by other people, right, who have significant resources. And then to complement the shift in deposits, you have to have a massive investment in equity capital for the bank. They call it tier 1 and tier 2 capital. Mm-hmm. That's the money that they would now use to upgrade their infrastructure, their systems, right, quality of personnel, so on and so forth, to be able to handle, manage, and grow that kind of money. You put $100 billion in Black banks, they would have to hire, I think it's like 20 or 30,000 people to be able to just manage those resources. And then you would have job creation and a secondary, tertiary effect, associated with that. It'd probably be like 70,000 jobs across the system, right? Direct hires, indirect, and then employment from tertiary economic activities. So there is significant opportunity there if we were to move it, but you have, Black banks face the Black tax, right? Sometimes you'll talk to people and they'll ask you, hey, are those banks FDIC insured? You know what I mean? It's like every bank in America is FDIC insured. Why would you ask if a Black bank is, right? And that's just an evidence of, anti-Black bias. So the answer is yes, absolutely. We should be doing that, as well as others, who are well capitalized.
Okay, so Shawn, I have a question for you. Talking about Black banks, wasn't there just some kind of conglomerate created or merger or something? Could you speak a little bit about that? Are you familiar with that?
Yeah, there was just a merger between two large Black banks, and they formed the largest Black bank in the country in a merger of equals, which is an excellent thing. They're stronger as one unit versus separately. There was also a creation of a digital online bank by rapper and activist Killer Mike, along with some other individuals. I believe the name of it is the Greenwood Bank, and these are important moves and additions, to Black banking. But what we need are things with really massive scale, right? The gap in wealth between the Black community and the white community is in the many, many trillions. So what we need are, Black banks with massive levels of capital infusion, probably on the order of $500 million, so they can upgrade and be in a better position to receive the deposits that they need.
Banks that are owned by or controlled by Latinx and Asian owners are growing, and the African American banks are not growing. There's a merger that you referred to. I think it was Broadway Federal and a bank in D.C. The other minority groups, their financial institutions are growing at a much faster rate than African Americans, and we need to know that, because obviously other racial groups think it's important to control financial assets, aggregate their assets together, and we should be doing the same thing.
And that is what we're going to be talking about in part 2 of this episode, because there's work that we can do in terms of stewardship. And I think, Shawn, in your book, you talk a lot about that. So we're going to have to encourage our viewers to this is part 1. Please take a look at part 2 when we start to drive towards solutions for this. So thank you so much, Shawn. You are the author of The Black Tax. What an incredible contribution you have made with this work that you're doing. And Colvin, you continue to just inspire me and inspire all of us in terms of being very focused on our economic life and other things as it relates to Central Brooklyn. Thank you, Savvy panelistas, and we'll see you next time on Brooklyn Savvy.